Jungkook breaks down during the last concert, but Jimin's quiet whisper changes everything, an emotional BTS fanfiction about love, fear, and healing. The roar of 70,000 voices shattered the night just as Jungkook's voice cracked on the final note. For a moment the stadium lights felt too bright, the stage too wide, and the world too loud. The music faded, but the echo of the crowd, army chanting their names, kept rolling like a living ocean around him. Jungkook lowered the microphone slowly, his chest rising and falling as if he had just run miles instead of performing one last song. The final concert. No one had said it out loud during rehearsals, but everyone knew. The tour had been long, the years even longer, and tonight carried the strange weight of an ending that none of them were ready to face. Jungkook blinked against the lights, and something warm slid down his cheek. He hadn't realized he was crying until the giant screens showed his face. A murmur rippled through the stadium. Tens of thousands of glowing light sticks swayed gently in the dark like a galaxy trembling around him. He tried to laugh it off. I didn't plan this," he said into the microphone, voice softer than usual. But the words stuck in his throat. The pressure inside his chest tightened, the way it always did when memories started flooding in all at once. 7 boys in a tiny practice room. Cheap speakers crackling. Sweat on the wooden floor. The first time they stood on a stage that wasn't empty. Jungkook had been 15 then, awkward, quiet, a kid who hid his fear behind determination. Back then, he believed success meant becoming strong enough to protect everyone else. Now, standing in the middle of a stadium filled with people who loved them, he suddenly felt small again. His fingers trembled around the microphone. Somewhere behind him, the others had gone quiet. Namjoon stood with his hands clasped together, watching with that calm understanding he always carried. Taehyung's eyes were already shining with emotion. Hosok bit his lip, smiling sadly at the crowd as if trying to keep the atmosphere warm. Yoongi looked down at the stage floor. And Jimin was watching Jungkook. Not the way fans watched him, not the way cameras captured him. Jimin watched him the way someone watches a person whose heart they know too well. Jungkook wiped his face quickly. "Sorry," he murmured. The crowd responded with louder cheers, as if trying to comfort him from thousands of meters away. He forced himself to speak again. "You know, when I first came to Seoul, I was really scared," he said. "I didn't know anything. I just had a dream and these 6 people." His voice shook again. "And army." The stadium erupted in screams. Jungkook smiled weakly, but another tear slipped down. The truth was heavier than what he was saying out loud. For months, he had carried a quiet fear inside him, something he hadn't been able to confess to anyone. What if this was the last time? Not just the last concert of the tour. The last moment like this. Life had a way of changing without warning. Years passed faster than anyone expected. Jungkook had always been the youngest, the one everyone protected, but now time was pulling all of them forward into unknown futures. He stared out at the sea of lights again. "So many memories," he whispered. The wind brushed against his damp hair. Somewhere in the distance, fireworks crackled faintly from another event in the city, their colors barely visible beyond the stadium roof. For a second, Jungkook felt strangely detached from his own body. He could hear his heartbeat louder than the crowd. He could feel the stage vibrating under his boots. And then he felt a hand gently touch his shoulder. Warm. Familiar. Jimin stepped closer. The movement was small, almost invisible to the audience, but Jungkook felt it immediately. Jimin always moved like that, quietly, softly, like someone who understood how fragile moments could be. "Hey," Jimin said under his breath. Jungkook didn't turn right away. He was afraid that if he looked at him, he would completely lose control. Jimin leaned closer until his lips were near Jungkook's ear. No cameras caught the exact words, no microphone picked them up clearly. But Jungkook heard them perfectly. "You're not alone." Just 4 words. Simple. But something inside Jungkook cracked open. He finally turned. Jimin's eyes were gentle, the same warm brown that had watched him grow from a shy teenager into the man standing here tonight. There was a quiet smile on Jimin's face, but behind it was something deeper: understanding, patience, affection that had been built over years of shared exhaustion and laughter. Jimin spoke again, barely louder than the wind. "We are still 7. Jungkook stared at him. Memories rushed back again, but this time they weren't heavy. Late-night meals after practice. Jimin nagging him about eating properly. Arguments that ended with laughter. Long flights where everyone fell asleep in awkward positions. Moments when success felt impossible, but they stayed anyway. 7. Not a number. A promise." Jungkook inhaled slowly, and the tightness in his chest began to loosen. The crowd was still chanting, "Army, army, armies." The sound rolled across the stadium like waves hitting the shore. Jungkook suddenly laughed through his tears. "You always do that," he said quietly to Jimin. "Do what?" "Say the exact thing I need to hear." Jimin shrugged with a small smile. "That's my talent." The giant screens showed them standing close together now, and the crowd reacted instantly, screaming louder as they noticed Jungkook leaning toward Jimin. Jungkook didn't think about cameras anymore. He didn't think about the stage, or the noise, or the expectations. He simply stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Jimin. The hug was sudden, tight, and completely real. For a split second, Jimin looked surprised. Then he hugged him back just as firmly. The stadium exploded with cheers. Light sticks flickered wildly, thousands of tiny stars shaking with excitement. Some fans were crying, others laughing, but everyone could feel the emotion radiating from the stage. Jungkook buried his face briefly against Jimin's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of stage powder and fabric softener. His voice came out muffled. "Thank you." Jimin patted his back gently. "You're welcome." When they finally pulled apart, Jungkook felt lighter. Not because the future was suddenly clear, or because the uncertainty had disappeared, but because he remembered something important. No matter where time carried them, this moment existed. This stage, this family, this ocean of people who had grown with them. Jungkook lifted his microphone again, his smile brighter now. "Army," he called out. The crowd screamed. He glanced at the 6 members beside him, then back at the fans. "Let's make this night unforgettable." And under the brilliant stadium lights, with music rising again and 70,000 hearts beating together, Jungkook finally felt ready to sing. The music thundered back to life, but something had shifted in the air. Jungkook could feel it in the way the crowd screamed louder than before, in the way his chest still trembled slightly from the hug, and in the way Jimin kept glancing at him with that quiet, searching look. The next song started, the beat vibrating through the stage floor, but Jungkook's mind was still somewhere between the past and the present. He sang anyway. His voice came out stronger now, smoother, cutting through the roar of the stadium. Years of training had taught him how to perform even when his emotions threatened to overflow. But tonight wasn't like other nights. Tonight felt like the end of something, and the beginning of something he didn't understand yet. Jimin danced beside him during the choreography, their movements perfectly synchronized as always. To the audience, it looked flawless, 2 performers executing a routine they had mastered over countless stages. But between the steps, Jimin leaned slightly closer. "You okay now?" he asked quickly, barely audible over the music. Jungkook nodded, while spinning into the next move. I think so. You scared everyone. I scared myself. Jimin smirked faintly. Good, that means you're human. The song ended with a burst of fireworks shooting from the stage edges, sparks lighting the stadium roof. The crowd erupted again. Namjoon stepped forward to speak, while the others caught their breath. "Army," he said, voice steady and warm, "how are you feeling tonight?" The fans screamed so loudly that Jungkook felt the sound in his ribs. Namjoon laughed softly. "Yeah, us too." The members gathered closer together now. Sweat glistened on their skin under the bright lights. The air smelled faintly of fireworks and metal. Taehyung nudged Jungkook with his elbow. "You nearly caused a global emotional disaster," he whispered. Jungkook groaned. "Please don't start." "Oh no," Taehyung said dramatically. "Twitter probably exploded already." Yoongi spoke without looking up. "It definitely did." Jungkook blinked. "You checked?" Yoongi lifted his phone briefly. Trending #1 worldwide, Jungkook crying. Hosok burst out laughing. "Well, that was fast." Jungkook covered his face with one hand. "Great, perfect." Jimin leaned toward him again. "You're famous, remember." "I know that," Jungkook muttered, "but crying in front of 70,000 people wasn't part of my plan." Jimin's expression softened again. "Sometimes the best moments aren't planned." Before Jungkook could answer, Namjoon suddenly cleared his throat. "Actually," he said into the microphone, "there's something we need to talk about tonight." The tone of his voice changed the atmosphere instantly. Even the crowd seemed to sense it. The cheers slowly faded into curious murmurs. Jungkook frowned slightly. That line hadn't been in the rehearsal script. He glanced at Yoongi, who raised one eyebrow. Jimin noticed too. Namjoon continued. "Army, you've been with us for a very long time, through every album, every stage, every moment of doubt." His voice was calm, but Jungkook could hear the tension beneath it. The members slowly formed a line beside him. "What's happening?" Jungkook whispered. Yoongi murmured back, "Something big." Namjoon took a deep breath. "And because you've always been honest with us, we want to be honest with you tonight." A ripple moved through the stadium. Jungkook's stomach tightened. He suddenly remembered a conversation from 3 nights ago in the hotel lounge. Namjoon and the management team had been talking quietly, their expressions serious. Jungkook hadn't asked questions then. Now he wished he had. Namjoon looked back at the members briefly. A silent exchange passed between them. Then he faced the crowd again. "For the first time since we debuted," he said slowly, "we're going to take a long break." The stadium exploded into shocked noise. Some fans screamed in confusion. Others shouted in support. Jungkook froze. "Break." No one had told him it would be announced tonight. Taehyung leaned toward him. "You didn't know either." Jungkook shook his head slowly. Jimin looked equally surprised. Namjoon raised his hands gently. "It's not the end," he said quickly, "but after everything we've done together, we believe it's time to breathe, to grow as individuals too." Hosok nodded beside him. "We'll still make music," he added into his microphone, "just maybe not all at the same time." The explanation didn't calm the storm. The crowd's reaction was mixed: love, fear, confusion all colliding in a single wave of emotion. Jungkook felt his heartbeat quicken again. He stepped closer to Namjoon and whispered urgently, "Why didn't we talk about this before saying it here?" Namjoon answered quietly without moving his smile. "Because if we waited, we'd never say it." Jungkook clenched his jaw. Part of him understood. Another part felt blindsided. Jimin noticed his expression immediately. Hey, Jimin murmured, breathe. Jungkook exhaled slowly. The fans had started chanting again. BTS, BTS, BTS. Their voices filled every corner of the stadium like thunder. Taehyung suddenly grabbed a microphone again. Army, he shouted. The crowd roared. He smiled in that dramatic, theatrical way he always had. You know we're dramatic, right? Laughter spread through the audience. So of course, we'd make our announcement at the most emotional moment possible. Even Namjoon laughed at that. Yoongi stepped forward next. We're not disappearing, he said calmly. We're just taking different roads for a while. Hosok nodded. And roads always cross again. The tension softened slightly. Jungkook watched the fans waving their light sticks, some crying, some smiling bravely. He suddenly realized something important. This wasn't just their story. It belonged to millions of people now. He lifted his microphone slowly. Army, he said. The stadium quieted again. Jungkook hesitated for a moment. Then he spoke honestly. I didn't know this announcement was happening tonight, he admitted. The confession shocked even the members. Jimin looked at him quickly. But Jungkook kept going. But maybe that's okay, he said softly, because if there's one thing we've always done, it's face things together. The crowd cheered again. Jungkook glanced at the 6 men beside him. They looked surprised, proud, emotional all at once. And no matter what happens next, Jungkook continued, we're still 7. Jimin smiled immediately. Namjoon nodded. Taehyung wiped his eyes dramatically. The crowd chanted louder than ever. 7, 7, 7. Jungkook turned toward Jimin again. You started that earlier, he said quietly. Jimin tilted his head. Started what? That sentence. Jimin laughed softly. Guess it's contagious. The stage lights dimmed slowly as the final part of the concert approached. The band began playing a softer melody. A familiar one. The kind that always made fans emotional. Jungkook looked out at the ocean of purple lights one more time. His heart still felt uncertain about the future. But the fear wasn't as sharp anymore. Because standing beside him were the same 6 people who had walked this road for years. And somewhere in the crowd, thousands of voices were still singing with them. The final melody drifted through the stadium like a slow heartbeat, softer than the thunder of the earlier songs, yet somehow heavier. Purple lights swayed across the darkness, thousands of glowing orbs rising and falling like a living sea. Jungkook stood near the edge of the stage, staring out at them while the gentle piano continued behind him. The announcement still hung in the air. A break. A long break. The words echoed in his mind, louder than the crowd. He felt Jimin's step beside him again. You're thinking too much, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook let out a short breath. I always do. You look like someone just told you the world is ending. Maybe it is, Jungkook muttered. Jimin turned his head slowly. Don't say that. Jungkook rubbed the back of his neck, his damp hair clinging to his fingers. You knew about this earlier, didn't you? Jimin hesitated. For the first time that night, his calm expression cracked slightly. I knew it might happen, he admitted. Jungkook looked at him sharply. And you didn't tell me. I wasn't sure, Jimin replied, and it wasn't my place. Jungkook's voice dropped. But you knew I hate surprises like that. Jimin's eyes softened. I know. The tension between them was quiet but real, like a thin wire pulled tight between 2 points. Behind them, Namjoon was speaking again, thanking the fans for their support over the years, his voice steady and thoughtful. The others stood nearby, occasionally adding comments, laughter, memories. But Jungkook barely heard it. "Why does it feel like everyone already accepted this except me?" he asked under his breath. Jimin folded his arms. "Because you're the one who holds on the hardest." Jungkook looked away. "That's not fair." "It's true." Jungkook scoffed softly. "You think I'm the only one who's scared?" Jimin stepped closer. "No," he said, "I think you're the only one who refuses to admit how scared you are." The words hit harder than Jungkook expected. For a moment, he had no response. On the giant screens above them, clips from past concerts began playing. Old footage, young versions of themselves laughing backstage, practicing choreography, celebrating their first award. The crowd gasped and cheered as memories flashed across the stadium. Taehyung's voice suddenly rang out nearby. "Look at Jungkook's haircut in this one." The audience laughed loudly. Jungkook groaned. "Oh my God." Even Yoongi chuckled. "You looked like a coconut." "Thanks," Jungkook muttered. The tension eased slightly, but the conversation between him and Jimin wasn't finished. Jimin leaned against one of the stage monitors, watching the old videos. "You remember that day?" he asked. Jungkook followed his gaze. The screen showed a clip from years ago. The seven of them squeezed together in a tiny backstage room, celebrating their first big win. Jungkook in the video looked impossibly young, his smile wide and shy. "Of course I remember," Jungkook said. "You cried that day too." "Yeah. And you said something." Jungkook frowned. "What?" Jimin turned toward him. "You said, no matter what happens, we should never stop standing on stage together." Jungkook felt a strange twist in his chest. He remembered. He had been 16. Everything had felt fragile back then. "I was a kid," he said quietly. Jimin shook his head. "No, you were honest." Jungkook ran a hand through his hair again. "Things change." Jimin studied him for a moment. "Do they?" Before Jungkook could answer, a sudden commotion erupted near the front of the stage. Security guards were moving quickly along the barricade. The fans near the front began shouting. "What's happening?" Hosok asked, squinting into the crowd. Namjoon paused his speech. The music stopped. For a few tense seconds, the stadium filled with confused murmurs. Jungkook stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "What's going on down there?" One of the staff members ran up the stairs toward them, speaking urgently into a headset. "A fan collapsed," the staff member said breathlessly. "Medical team is coming." Jungkook's heart jumped. "Collapsed?" "Yes, probably dehydration." Without hesitation, Jungkook moved toward the stairs. "Wait," Namjoon said quickly. But Jungkook was already heading down. Jimin followed immediately. The crowd gasped as the two of them disappeared from the stage. Down near the barricade, security had cleared a small space. A young woman sat on the ground, pale and trembling, while two medics knelt beside her. Her light stick had rolled away. Jungkook crouched down instinctively. "Is she okay?" The medic glanced up, startled to see him. "She'll be fine," he said, just overwhelmed. The fan looked up weakly, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Jungkook." He gave a small, reassuring smile. "You scared us." Tears filled her eyes instantly. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize," Jimin said gently, kneeling beside them. "You need to breathe." The crowd around them had gone almost silent now, watching the moment unfold. The fan clutched the edge of the barricade. I didn't want to miss the last concert, she whispered. Jungkook felt that same tightness return to his chest. It's not the last, he said firmly. She shook her head. It feels like it. Jimin looked at Jungkook then. Their eyes met. The same fear. The same thought. Maybe that was exactly how everyone felt tonight. After a few minutes, the medics helped the fans stand. The crowd cheered softly as she was escorted away safely. Jungkook exhaled slowly. Jimin nudged him. You see. See what? People hold on just like you do. Jungkook stared back at the massive stadium. All those lights. All those faces. Waiting. Believing. Yeah, he said quietly. They climbed back onto the stage, greeted by thunderous applause. Taehyung immediately wrapped Jungkook in a dramatic hug. Hero entrance. Jungkook laughed despite himself. Relax. Namjoon stepped forward again, his voice thoughtful. Moments like that remind us why we do this, he said to the crowd. The fans responded with emotional cheers. Yoongi spoke next, calm but sincere. We worry about you too, you know. Hosok nodded. Take care of yourselves. The atmosphere had changed again, less tense now, more intimate. Jungkook looked at Jimin. Thanks for coming with me. Jimin shrugged lightly. Where else would I go? The band began playing the final song of the night. A slow, emotional anthem that every fan knew by heart. Jungkook lifted his microphone once more. As the first notes rose into the air, 70,000 voices joined in instantly. The sound filled the stadium like a storm of emotion. And for the rest of the night, Jungkook sang with everything he had left in his heart. The final note of the concert lingered in the air long after the music stopped. For several seconds, no one on stage moved. 70,000 voices slowly faded into a trembling silence, as if the entire stadium was holding its breath, refusing to accept that the night was ending. Jungkook stood in the center of the stage, chest rising and falling as the adrenaline finally began to leave his body. The bright lights felt warmer now, softer somehow, reflecting off the endless ocean of purple lights that still waved gently in the darkness. Then the crowd began chanting again. Not loudly, not wildly, but steadily. BTS, BTS, BTS. The sound wrapped around the stage like a heartbeat. Taehyung wiped his face with his sleeve, his voice cracking slightly. They're not letting us leave. Hosok laughed softly, though his eyes were glassy. They never do. Namjoon looked out across the stadium, his expression thoughtful, almost overwhelmed. This is why it's so hard, he murmured. Yoongi sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah. Jimin glanced sideways at Jungkook. You're quiet again. Jungkook didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the crowd. They're scared, he said finally. Jimin tilted his head. Of course they are. No, Jungkook said softly, not just about the break. Jimin studied his face. Then what? Jungkook swallowed. They're scared of losing us. The words hung between them like fragile glass. For a moment, Jimin didn't respond. Then he spoke quietly. They won't. Jungkook looked at him. You can't promise that. Jimin held his gaze. Yes, I can. Jungkook's jaw tightened slightly. You don't know the future. No, Jimin admitted, but I know us. The tension between them returned again, subtle but sharp. Across the stage, Namjoon stepped toward the microphone one last time. Army, he said gently. The chanting softened. Tonight, we shared a lot of emotions. A ripple of agreement moved through the stadium. Namjoon smiled faintly. And maybe some surprises. Taehyung chuckled beside him. Some. Namjoon continued. But before we say goodbye tonight, there's something else we want to say. The members exchanged quick glances. Jungkook felt a strange feeling creep into his stomach again. Another surprise. He looked at Yoongi. Yoongi looked equally confused. What now? Jungkook muttered. But Namjoon wasn't the one who stepped forward next. It was Jimin. Jungkook blinked. Jimin took the microphone slowly, his expression calm but serious. The crowd screamed his name instantly. Jimin, Jimin, Jimin. Jimin raised his hand slightly, asking them to quiet down. When the stadium settled, he spoke. There's something I've been thinking about for a long time. His voice carried clearly through the massive speakers. Jungkook watched him carefully. Jimin rarely made spontaneous speeches. And the way he was standing now, straight, steady, almost nervous, made Jungkook's pulse quicken. Jimin continued. When we debuted, we were just kids with impossible dreams. The giant screens behind them flashed old images again. Practice rooms, dorm rooms, early performances. We promised each other we'd protect this team, Jimin said. His eyes moved briefly toward the other members. And we did. Hosok nodded slowly. Taehyung smiled softly. Jimin took a small breath. But protecting something also means being honest. The atmosphere shifted again. The crowd grew quiet. Jungkook frowned slightly. Honest about what? Jimin's gaze moved across the stadium, then slowly back toward the members. Finally, it stopped on Jungkook. Jungkook felt his stomach drop. Oh no. Jimin spoke again. There are things we've hidden for a long time, he said. The words echoed across the stadium. Even the other members looked surprised now. Namjoon's eyebrows lifted slightly. Yoongi crossed his arms. Taehyung whispered, "What is he doing?" Jungkook didn't answer. Because he knew. Or at least he thought he knew. And his heart was suddenly pounding so hard he could barely hear anything else. Jimin continued slowly. Not secrets that hurt people, he said, but truths that we were afraid the world wouldn't understand. The crowd murmured. Jungkook stepped closer to him, whispering urgently. Jimin. Jimin didn't look at him. Not now. Jimin, Jungkook repeated more firmly. Jimin's fingers tightened around the microphone. I spent years wondering if honesty would destroy everything we built. Namjoon stepped forward slightly. Jimin, he said quietly. But Jimin continued speaking. And maybe tonight isn't the safest moment to say this. Jungkook grabbed his wrist suddenly. The crowd gasped at the sudden movement. Jimin finally looked at him. Their eyes locked. What are you doing? Jungkook whispered. Jimin's expression was soft but determined. Something I should have done a long time ago. Jungkook shook his head quickly. You'll cause chaos. Maybe. You could hurt the group. Jimin's voice dropped lower. Or maybe I'll save it. The words stunned him. Behind them, the other members were watching with growing tension. Yoongi muttered under his breath. This is getting dangerous. Taehyung nodded slowly. Very. Namjoon spoke again into his mic, trying to ease the atmosphere. Army, sometimes emotions run high during concerts. But Jimin raised his hand. Please let me finish. The stadium fell completely silent now. Even the wind seemed to stop moving. Jungkook's grip on Jimin's wrist loosened slightly. His heart was racing. What are you going to say? He whispered. Jimin's voice was barely audible. The truth. Jungkook felt a flash of fear. Jimin, think about what you're risking. Jimin's eyes softened again. I already have. He gently pulled his wrist free from Jungkook's hand. Then he faced the crowd once more. For a moment he simply stood there, breathing slowly, gathering courage. When he spoke again, his voice carried something deeper than nervousness. It carried relief. For years, Jimin said, I've had someone beside me who understood me better than anyone else in this world. The crowd murmured loudly. Jungkook felt frozen in place. Jimin continued. He saw me at my weakest moments, when I doubted myself, when I thought I wasn't good enough. Taehyung's eyes widened slightly. Hosok whispered, is he? Yoongi didn't answer. Jimin's voice grew steadier. And he never left. Jungkook felt heat rising in his face. His mind screamed at him to stop this. But his feet refused to move. Jimin slowly turned his head and looked directly at him. The stadium erupted in shocked screams. Jungkook's heart nearly stopped. Jimin spoke softly now. But what matters most is that he's the reason I'm still standing here today. The giant screens zoomed in on both of them. Two figures under blinding lights. Thousands of fans holding their breath. Jungkook could barely speak. Jimin. Jimin gave a small, trembling smile. And for the first time that night, Jungkook realized something terrifying. Jimin wasn't afraid anymore. The stadium had never been this quiet. Not during rehearsals. Not during award speeches. Not even during their most emotional songs. 70,000 people stood frozen in place, their purple light sticks trembling slightly in their hands as every giant screen in the stadium showed the same image. Jimin, looking directly at Jungkook. The silence stretched so long it began to feel unreal. Jungkook felt the weight of it pressing against his chest like gravity. His heart hammered violently, each beat echoing in his ears louder than the speakers ever had. He knew exactly what Jimin was about to do. And the terrifying part was that a part of him had always known this moment might come. Jimin, Jungkook said quietly, his voice barely carrying through the microphone. Jimin didn't look away. There was no panic in his eyes now. Only a strange calm. A calm that scared Jungkook more than anything else. Behind them, the other members stood in stunned silence. Taehyung whispered hoarsely, is this really happening right now? Hosok rubbed both hands over his face, packing once in a small circle. Jimin, oh no, oh no. Yoongi remained still, arms crossed, his expression unreadable but tense. Namjoon stepped closer slowly, careful not to interrupt but clearly alert. The air on stage had changed. This wasn't just emotional anymore. It was dangerous. Jimin finally lifted the microphone again. When we started this journey, he said slowly, I didn't understand what love really meant. The crowd stirred. Jungkook felt a cold wave move down his spine. Jimin continued. I thought love meant perfection, being strong, never showing weakness. His voice trembled slightly now. But then, someone kept seeing my worst sides. Jungkook clenched his jaw. Jimin, he whispered again. But Jimin kept going. He saw me when I was jealous, when I was insecure, when I thought I didn't deserve to stand here. The crowd murmured louder. The tension in the stadium grew thick enough to touch. Jungkook stepped closer to him, his voice low and urgent. You don't have to do this. Jimin finally looked at him again. Don't I? You know what will happen. Yes, Jimin said quietly, I do. Jungkook's voice sharpened. This could explode everywhere. the media, the company, everything. Jimin tilted his head slightly. Are you worried about the company or about us? The question struck deeper than Jungkook expected. For a moment, he had no answer. Across the stage, Taehyung suddenly spoke loudly into his microphone. Okay. Everyone turned toward him. Taehyung forced a laugh. This concert just turned into a drama series. The crowd laughed nervously, but the tension remained. Hosok quickly stepped in beside him. Taehyung's right, he said, trying to lighten the mood. Maybe we should all breathe for a second. Namjoon nodded slowly. But Jimin didn't step back. Instead, he said something even more shocking. I'm tired of hiding. The words echoed across the stadium like thunder. A wave of screams exploded from the crowd. Jungkook's eyes widened. You're not hiding, he said quickly. We're protecting things. Jimin's voice rose slightly. Protecting what? The team. And what about ourselves? Jimin fired back. The sudden sharpness of his voice startled everyone. Yoongi finally uncrossed his arms. That's enough, he said calmly but firmly. Jimin looked toward him. Yoongi's gaze was steady. Think carefully before the next sentence you say. Jimin exhaled slowly. For a second, it looked like he might step back. But then he spoke again. Do you know what the hardest part of fame is? No one answered. It's pretending the most important parts of your life don't exist. The crowd erupted into louder murmurs. Jungkook's pulse raced. Jimin, he said quietly. Jimin turned toward him again. You know I'm right. Jungkook shook his head slightly. You're emotional right now. And you're scared. Yes, Jungkook snapped suddenly. The word came out louder than he expected. The stadium reacted instantly. Jimin blinked. Jungkook ran a hand through his hair, his voice shaking. Yes, I'm scared, he admitted, because I know how brutal the world can be. Jimin softened slightly. So do I. Then why risk everything? Jimin stepped closer. Because some things are worth the risk. The two of them stood only inches apart now. The crowd was losing control, screaming, whispering, speculating all at once. Taehyung leaned toward Yoongi. This is going to break the internet. Yoongi muttered back, it already has. Namjoon watched carefully, clearly calculating every possible outcome. But he didn't interrupt. Not yet. Jungkook spoke again, his voice lower now. You think honesty will set us free? Jimin nodded faintly. Yes. Jungkook shook his head. Sometimes honesty destroys things. Jimin smiled sadly. And sometimes silence does. The words landed like a blade. For a moment, neither of them moved. The crowd watched every second on the giant screens. Every breath, every glance. Jungkook finally spoke again. What exactly are you trying to say? Jimin's fingers tightened around the microphone again. His voice softened. I'm trying to say that the person who kept me alive through the darkest years is standing right in front of me. The screams from the stadium exploded again. Jungkook felt his face burning under the lights. You're making assumptions, he said quickly. Jimin laughed quietly. Are you really going to pretend you don't know? Jungkook looked away briefly. His silence said more than words. Jimin's voice trembled again. You were there every time I thought about giving up. The crowd gasped. Taehyung's expression changed completely. Wait, what? Jimin continued. You sat with me at 3 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. Jungkook whispered urgently. Stop. You told me I was stronger than my fears. Jimin, you held my hand when I thought I was breaking. Jimin. But Jimin finished the sentence anyway. And somewhere along the way, I realized I loved you. The stadium exploded into chaos. Screams, gasps, shock rippled through 70,000 people at once. Even the other members froze. Hosok covered his mouth. Taehyung stared in disbelief. Namjoon closed his eyes briefly. Yoongi looked directly at Jungkook. And Jungkook himself stood completely still. His mind had gone blank. Jimin lowered the microphone slightly, his chest rising and falling quickly now. But he looked lighter, freer, like someone who had finally dropped a heavy weight. Jungkook stared at him. You just said that in front of the entire world. Jimin nodded slowly. Yes. Jungkook let out a stunned breath. You really did it. Jimin's voice softened again. I did. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The stadium buzzed with chaotic energy. Finally, Jungkook asked the question everyone was thinking. Why tonight? Jimin looked around the stadium. At the lights. At the fans. At the stage they had shared for years. Then he answered quietly. Because if this was the last night we stood here together, I didn't want to leave with regrets. The sound that erupted from the stadium no longer resembled cheering. It was chaos. 70,000 voices collided into one massive wave of shock, disbelief, excitement, and confusion. Some fans screamed in support, others gasped so loudly that the microphones picked up the sound. Phones shot into the air everywhere like stars rising suddenly into the night sky. On the giant screens, Jungkook and Jimin stood frozen in the center of it all. Two figures caught inside a moment that no one could take back. Jungkook felt as if the ground beneath the stage had tilted. The words still echoed in his head. I realized I loved you. He stared at Jimin, as if trying to determine whether this was real or some surreal hallucination created by exhaustion and adrenaline. You just said that, Jungkook murmured again. Jimin nodded. His face was pale but steady. Yes. Behind them, Taehyung turned in a slow circle, staring at the stadium as if witnessing a natural disaster. Okay, he said under his breath. The internet definitely exploded. Hosok looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. Oh my God. Yoongi remained calm on the outside, but his jaw was tight. Namjoon stepped forward, gripping his microphone carefully. The leader in him had already begun calculating damage control. But even he knew there was no controlling this. The moment had already left their hands. The stadium grew louder and louder as the realization spread. Jimin had just confessed his love to Jungkook. Live. In front of the entire world. Jungkook finally found his voice again. You should have told me you were going to do that. Jimin's eyes softened. If I told you, you would have stopped me. Of course I would have. Jimin gave a small, sad smile. Exactly. Jungkook ran both hands through his hair, packing a few steps away. You don't understand what this means. I do. No, Jungkook said sharply, you don't. His voice echoed louder than he expected. The crowd reacted instantly. Taehyung winced slightly. Wow, this is really happening. Jimin's voice stayed calm. Then explain it to me. Jungkook turned back toward him, frustration blazing in his eyes. This isn't just about us. I know. It's about the group. I know that too. It's about the company, the contracts, the media, the fans. And what about you? Jimin interrupted quietly. Jungkook stopped. The question cut straight through his anger. What about me? Jungkook repeated. Yes, Jimin said, you. Jungkook laughed bitterly. You want the honest answer? Yes. Jungkook gestured toward the stadium. The honest answer is that right now millions of people are watching us fall apart. Jimin shook his head slowly. I don't see us falling apart. Jungkook stared at him. I see the truth finally showing. The crowd screamed again at the tension in their voices. Even the members felt it. Namjoon stepped closer, lowering his voice. Both of you breathe. But neither of them seemed able to stop. Jungkook spoke again, his voice raw. You could destroy everything we built tonight. Jimin's eyes flashed with something deeper now. Or maybe I just revealed something that's always been there. The words hit harder than expected. Jungkook clenched his fists. You're putting words in my mouth. Jimin stepped closer. Am I? Their faces were only a few feet apart now. The crowd felt the electricity between them. Yoongi muttered quietly behind them. This is becoming a confession war. Taehyung whispered back, should we stop them? Yoongi shook his head slightly. No one could stop them right now. Jungkook's voice dropped lower. You think I haven't thought about it? Jimin blinked. The tension shifted instantly. What? Jungkook's breathing was uneven. You think I haven't wondered why you matter so much to me? The crowd gasped loudly. Jimin froze. Jungkook looked away briefly, jaw tight. For years I told myself it was just because we grew up together. Jimin's voice was barely audible. And Jungkook's eyes returned to him. And I convinced myself that was enough. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Jimin whispered, but it was. Jungkook didn't answer immediately. The stadium lights reflected in his eyes as he stared at Jimin. Finally he said quietly, no. The crowd erupted again. Hoseok covered his face. Oh my God, this is a movie. Taehyung laughed nervously. A very dangerous movie. Namjoon still watched carefully, letting the moment unfold. Jimin stepped even closer now. So you did know. Jungkook swallowed. I suspected. And you never said anything. Jungkook let out a humorless laugh. You think our lives are that simple? Jimin shook his head. No. Then you understand why I stayed quiet. Jimin looked at him for a long moment. Then he said something that stunned everyone again. I wasn't asking you to confess. Jungkook frowned. Then why say it tonight? Jimin's voice trembled slightly now. Because I needed you to know before we walk separate paths. The words landed deeply. The announcement of the break suddenly felt heavier. More permanent. Jungkook's expression softened slightly. You think we are really going separate ways? Jimin shrugged faintly. No one knows the future. Jungkook studied him carefully. Then he asked quietly, and if I told you I wasn't ready to lose you? Jimin's breath caught. You wouldn't lose me. That's not what it feels like tonight. Jimin stepped closer again, their shoulders almost touching. You're the one who hugged me first earlier, he reminded him softly. Jungkook looked down briefly. Because I needed you. Jimin's eyes widened slightly. The crowd reacted again. Jungkook lifted his gaze. And maybe that's what scares me the most. Jimin whispered, needing someone. Yes. The confession hung between them. Raw. Honest. Dangerous. Jimin's voice softened even more. You already knowed me. Jungkook didn't deny it. The stadium buzzed with emotion. Namjoon finally stepped forward again, sensing the moment had reached a breaking point. "Army," he said gently into the microphone. The crowd quieted slightly. "Tonight, something very real just happened." He glanced at Jungkook and Jimin. "And real things are complicated." No one argued with that. Jungkook looked at Jimin again. "So what now?" Jimin smiled faintly. "For once, we stop pretending." The crowd roared again. Jungkook let out a slow breath. For the first time that night, he didn't look terrified. He looked thoughtful. And somewhere deep in the stadium, thousands of fans realized they were witnessing a moment that would be talked about for years. The roar of the stadium refused to die down. Even after Namjoon spoke, even after the music team quietly lowered the background sound to calm the atmosphere, the energy in the air continued crackling like electricity after lightning strikes. Jungkook could feel it vibrating through the stage floor beneath his boots. Nothing about this night was normal anymore. Nothing could go back to normal. He looked at Jimin again, still standing close, still holding the microphone like someone who had crossed a line and accepted the consequences. For years, Jungkook had known Jimin as someone gentle, someone who worried too much about everyone else's feelings. But the man standing in front of him tonight looked different. Stronger, terrifyingly fearless. Jungkook spoke again, his voice lower now but steady. "You understand that every camera in the world just captured that?" Jimin nodded calmly. "Yes, you're trending everywhere right now." "Probably." Jungkook ran a hand down his face, half laughing in disbelief. "You really don't care, do you?" Jimin shrugged lightly. "I care about the truth." Jungkook looked around the stadium again. Thousands of phones were still pointed at them. Fans crying. Fans screaming. Fans whispering to each other in shock. "This isn't just truth," Jungkook said. "This is chaos." Jimin tilted his head. Maybe chaos was necessary. Behind them, Taehyung suddenly spoke loudly into his mic. "Okay," he said dramatically, looking at the crowd. "We need to address the giant emotional hurricane happening on this stage." The fans laughed nervously. Hosok rubbed his temples. "I think my heart rate tripled tonight." Yoongi finally stepped forward as well, his calm voice cutting through the noise. "This concert is definitely going into history." Namjoon sighed softly but smiled a little. "That much is certain." But the center of attention remained Jungkook and Jimin. Jungkook's thoughts were racing now. Every memory he had buried for years seemed to surface all at once. Late-night conversations. Jimin waiting for him after rehearsals. Moments when their hands brushed and neither of them pulled away quickly enough. All the questions Jungkook had forced himself not to ask. He exhaled slowly. "You said you didn't want regrets," Jungkook said quietly. Jimin nodded. "Yes, but do you realize what you've done to me tonight?" Jimin blinked. "What do you mean?" Jungkook gave a small, tired laugh. "You dropped a bomb in the middle of my world." The crowd reacted loudly again. Jimin's voice softened. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "I know." "Then what's wrong?" Jungkook stared at him. "What's wrong is that you said the thing I spent years trying not to think about." The confession sent another shockwave through the audience. Jimin's eyes widened slightly. "You tried not to think about it." Jungkook nodded. "Every single day." Jimin swallowed. "Why?" Jungkook gestured around them again. "Because of this. The stadium. The fans. The cameras." The moment we debuted, Jungkook continued, our lives stopped belonging only to us. Jimin's gaze lowered slightly. I know. So I told myself certain feelings didn't matter. The silence grew heavier. Taehyung whispered to Hosok nearby. This is more intense than any drama I've ever watched. Hosok nodded slowly. I forgot we were still at a concert. Yoongi watched Jungkook carefully. He had seen Jungkook under pressure before. But never like this. Jungkook spoke again. You think I never noticed the way you look at me? Jimin's breath caught. You noticed. Jungkook gave a small, humorless smile. Jimin, you're not subtle. The crowd laughed through their shock. Jimin shook his head softly. And you never said anything. No. Why? Jungkook answered honestly. Because if I admitted it, I'd have to admit what it meant to me too. The words hit like thunder. Even the other members looked stunned now. Namjoon murmured quietly, almost to himself. So he did know. Jimin stepped closer again. And what does it mean to you? Jungkook hesitated. The entire stadium seemed to lean forward. He looked into Jimin's eyes. Then he said something that made the crowd gasp again. It means you're the most dangerous person in my life. Jimin blinked in confusion. Dangerous? Yes. Jungkook's voice softened slightly. Because you're the one person who could break me. The confession hung in the air like fragile glass. Jimin looked shaken now. I would never hurt you. I know. Then why say that? Jungkook laughed quietly. Because loving someone means giving them that power. The stadium erupted into emotional screams. Taehyung clutched Hosok's arm dramatically. Did Jungkook just admit? Hosok slapped a hand over Taehyung's mouth. Let him finish. Jimin's voice was trembling now. So you do love me? The question was so direct that even Jungkook looked stunned. He looked away briefly. Then back at him. I didn't say that. But you implied it. Jungkook sighed. You're impossible. Jimin smiled faintly. You love that about me. The tension broke slightly when Jungkook laughed again. You're unbelievable. But you didn't deny it. Jungkook didn't answer. Instead, he looked out at the crowd again. Thousands of fans staring at them with tears in their eyes. Some shocked, some hopeful, some simply overwhelmed. Jungkook turned back to Jimin. You realize they're analyzing every word we say right now. Jimin nodded. Yes. So maybe we should stop before we accidentally confess something else. Jimin studied him carefully. Then he asked quietly, do you want to stop? Jungkook didn't answer immediately. His heart was still racing. His mind was still trying to catch up with the reality of this moment. Finally, he said softly, I don't know. Jimin's expression softened again. That's okay. Jungkook looked surprised. You're not angry. Why would I be? Because I didn't say the words back. Jimin smiled gently. I didn't confess to force you. Jungkook's chest tightened again. You really are brave tonight. Jimin shrugged. Or maybe I just ran out of patience. The crowd laughed softly. Namjoon stepped forward again, sensing the emotional storm had reached its peak. Army, he said with a warm smile. The stadium quieted slightly again. This might be the most honest concert in history. Fans laughed and cheered. Namjoon looked at Jungkook and Jimin. Whatever happens next, he said, we'll face it together. The other members nodded. 7 figures standing under the lights. Jungkook looked at Jimin once more. Together, home. Jimin smiled. Always. The stadium lights slowly dimmed, but the energy refused to fade. It lingered in the air like heat after a storm. Jungkook could still feel the tremor in his chest as the final stage lights washed the 7 of them in soft purple. The concert should have been over by now. Normally, they would already be backstage, collapsing on couches, laughing about mistakes during choreography, drinking water like they had crossed a desert. But tonight, the stage had turned into something else. A battlefield of truth. 70,000 fans still stood there, unwilling to leave, unwilling to break the moment that had just unfolded in front of them. Namjoon looked out across the stadium again and slowly lifted his microphone. "Army," he said softly. The crowd responded instantly with cheers, though the sound was quieter now, more emotional than explosive. "I think tonight became something none of us expected." Taehyung laughed faintly. "That's one way to describe it." Hosok leaned forward slightly, whispering toward Yoongi. "I feel like we accidentally started a global documentary." Yoongi gave a small smirk. "Or a scandal." The word hung in the air. Scandal. Everyone knew it. Phones were still recording. Clips were already spreading across the internet faster than wildfire. Jungkook could practically imagine the headlines forming. He exhaled slowly and looked at Jimin again. Jimin still stood close, but the earlier fire in his eyes had softened. Now he looked more vulnerable than fearless. "You're quiet again," Jimin said gently. Jungkook rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm thinking." "That's dangerous." Jungkook laughed under his breath. "Everything tonight has been dangerous." Jimin tilted his head slightly. "Do you regret it?" The question was simple, but the weight behind it was. Jungkook looked down at the stage floor for a moment, watching the purple lights reflect across the polished surface. Then he answered honestly, "I regret that the world had to hear it before I was ready." Jimin's shoulders dropped slightly. "But you don't regret the truth itself?" Jungkook looked back up at him. "No." The single word caused another wave of cheers to ripple through the stadium. Taehyung leaned toward Hosok again. "They're basically confessing in slow motion." Hosok whispered back, "I can't believe we're still on stage." Yoongi crossed his arms again. "They need to finish this." Namjoon nodded faintly. "Yes." Jimin looked directly into Jungkook's eyes again. "So what now?" Jungkook let out a long breath. "That's the problem." "What problem?" "I don't know how to exist in a world where this is public." Jimin's expression softened again. "You've existed under pressure your entire life." "That's different." "How?" Jungkook gestured toward the stadium again. "Because now every person here is wondering the same thing." "What thing?" Jungkook's voice dropped. "Whether I feel the same way." The crowd erupted again. Jimin smiled slightly. "Well, do you?" Jungkook groaned. "You're unbelievable." Jimin shrugged. "I waited years, I'm allowed to ask." Jungkook looked at him with disbelief. "You picked the worst possible moment." "I picked the most honest one." The tension between them returned again, but it felt different now. Less like a fight. More like a door slowly opening. Jungkook stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You realize if I answer that question, everything changes." Jimin nodded. "Yes." "Forever." "Yes." "And you're still asking?" Jimin didn't hesitate. "Yes." The crowd was practically vibrating with anticipation now. Even the other members had stopped whispering. Everyone was watching. Jungkook looked at each of them briefly. Taehyung gave him a small, encouraging nod. Hoseok's eyes were wide but supportive. Yoongi looked calm but attentive. Namjoon simply watched quietly. Then Jungkook turned back to Jimin. "You really put me in a corner tonight." Jimin smiled faintly. "I thought you liked challenges. Not this kind." Jimin's voice softened. "I wasn't trying to trap you." "Then what were you trying to do?" Jimin answered without hesitation. "Give you a choice." The simplicity of the answer stunned him. Jungkook stared at him. "A choice?" "Yes." "What kind of choice?" Jimin's eyes held his. "The choice to stop hiding too." The stadium fell silent again. Jungkook felt his heart racing harder than during any performance. He thought about the years they had shared. The arguments, the laughter, the quiet moments that no cameras had ever captured, and the feelings he had carefully locked away because acknowledging them felt too dangerous. He spoke slowly. "You want the truth?" Jimin nodded. "Yes." Jungkook swallowed. "The truth is, you've been my weakness for a long time." A wave of shocked cries rolled through the stadium. Jimin blinked, stunned. "My weakness?" Jungkook nodded. "Because when you're hurt, I feel it." Jimin's breathing slowed. "When you're sad, I notice it before anyone else." The crowd reacted again. "And when you look at me, the way you did tonight." Jungkook paused. Jimin whispered softly. "Yes." Jungkook's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "I forget how to pretend." The confession hit the crowd like lightning. Taehyung clutched his chest dramatically. "Okay, that was romantic." Hoseok shook his head in disbelief. "They're not even trying to be subtle anymore." Yoongi chuckled quietly. "Subtle left the building an hour ago." Jimin's eyes were shining now. "So you're saying—" Jungkook interrupted quickly. "I'm saying you're important to me." "That's not the same thing." Jungkook sighed. "You're impossible. And you're avoiding the real answer." Jungkook looked away again. The stadium waited. Finally, he spoke again. "Maybe I've been afraid of how much you matter." Jimin's voice was barely audible. "And now?" Jungkook looked back at him. "Now I'm standing in front of 70,000 witnesses who won't let me run away from it." The crowd cheered loudly. Jimin laughed softly. "They really won't." Jungkook shook his head. "You're enjoying this too much." "Maybe a little." Jungkook stared at him for another long moment. Then he said something that stunned even the members. "If we survive the aftermath of tonight." Jimin's heart visibly skipped. "Yes." Jungkook gave a small, nervous smile. "Maybe we should finally talk about this without 70,000 people watching." The crowd screamed again. Jimin's smile widened. "That sounds like a date." Jungkook nearly choked. "I did not say that." "You implied it." "I hate you." Jimin laughed. "No, you don't." Jungkook tried to hide his smile. The tension that had dominated the stage all night slowly melted into something warmer. Something uncertain but hopeful. Namjoon stepped forward again, looking at the crowd. "Well," he said with a soft laugh, "I think tonight proved something important." The fans quieted again. Namjoon smiled. "No matter what happens in the future, honesty is powerful." The stadium erupted into cheers once more. 7 silhouettes stood under the fading lights. And somewhere deep inside Jungkook's chest. The fear that had haunted him all night was slowly beginning to transform into something else. Something terrifying. Something beautiful. Possibility. The stadium lights dimmed further, turning the endless ocean of purple into something softer, almost dreamlike. The chaos that had once filled the air was slowly settling into something quieter, something deeper. The screams were still there, but now they carried warmth instead of shock. Jungkook stood in the center of the stage, breathing slowly. Everything felt different now. Not because the world had changed in a few minutes, but because the truth had finally stepped out from the shadows where it had been hiding for years. He looked around the stadium once more. 70,000 people were still there. Still watching. Still supporting. Some were crying, some were smiling through tears. Others simply held their light sticks close to their chests as if trying to preserve the moment forever. For the first time that night, Jungkook felt the weight in his chest loosen. He turned toward Jimin again. Jimin was watching him with that same quiet gaze he had always had, the gaze of someone who knew him far better than the world ever could. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Years of memories lived inside that silence. Jungkook finally let out a small laugh. "You really changed everything tonight." Jimin scratched the back of his neck, suddenly looking less fearless than before. "Yeah, I guess I did." "You dropped a confession in front of 70,000 people. When you say it like that, it sounds terrifying." "It was terrifying." Jimin smiled faintly. "But you didn't run away." Jungkook looked at the stage floor for a second, then back at him. "I thought about it." Jimin laughed softly. "That sounds like you." Jungkook's expression softened. "But I stayed." The crowd cheered when they heard that. Taehyung suddenly threw an arm around Hosok dramatically. "I feel like we just watched the final episode of a romance drama." Hosok wiped imaginary tears from his eyes. The tension, the confession, the emotional growth. Yoongi shook his head with quiet amusement. "You two are unbelievable." Namjoon stepped forward again, smiling warmly at the audience. "Army," he said, his voice carrying gently through the stadium. The fans answered with a powerful cheer. "I think tonight showed something important." He looked back at the 6 men beside him. "For years we stood here as artists, performers, idols." The crowd listened closely. "But tonight we stood here as something even more honest." He paused briefly. "As human beings." The stadium erupted with applause. Jungkook felt a sudden rush of gratitude for the man standing beside him, for the team that had carried him through every stage of his life. He looked again at Jimin. "You know what the craziest part is?" Jungkook said quietly. "What?" "For years, I thought telling the truth would destroy everything." Jimin's voice was soft. "And now?" Jungkook glanced around the stadium. The fans were still cheering, still waving their lights, still loving them. "Now it feels like the truth just brought us closer." Jimin's smile grew warmer. "That's what I hoped." Jungkook shook his head slightly in disbelief. "You really are reckless. And you're really cautious. Someone has to be." Jimin laughed. "Well, tonight we balanced each other." Jungkook nodded slowly. "Yeah." The stage crew had begun lowering some of the lighting rigs. The music team played a soft instrumental in the background as the night finally approached its end. Namjoon raised his microphone one last time. "This concert will always be special to us," he said. "Not because it was perfect." He glanced toward Jungkook and Jimin. "But because it was real." The fans responded with another wave of emotional cheers. Taehyung raised his arms dramatically toward the crowd. Army, thank you for surviving the most chaotic concert in history. Laughter rippled through the stadium. Hosok bowed deeply. Thank you for loving us for all these years. Yoongi gave a small nod. Take care of yourselves. One by one, the 7 of them stepped forward together. They joined hands as they had done countless times before. 7 silhouettes standing under the fading purple lights. Jungkook felt Jimin's hand beside his. Warm, steady, familiar. He didn't pull away. Instead, he held it a little tighter. The crowd noticed immediately. Another emotional wave of cheers swept through the stadium. Jimin leaned slightly closer and whispered, just loud enough for Jungkook to hear. So, about that conversation, without 70,000 witnesses. Jungkook smiled faintly. Yes, I'm still waiting for it. Jungkook looked at him, his eyes softer than they had been all night. We'll have that conversation. Jimin's voice carried a quiet hope. Soon. Jungkook nodded. Soon. The music swelled gently. Namjoon raised their joined hands toward the crowd. Army, he said warmly, we'll see you again. The stadium erupted one last time. Purple lights filled the darkness like a galaxy shining just for them. As the stage lights slowly faded and the 7 figures bowed together, Jungkook realized something he hadn't understood before. The future was uncertain. The world outside the stadium would be loud, complicated, and full of questions. But the moment they had created tonight was real. Honest. Unforgettable. And as he walked off the stage beside Jimin and the others, Jungkook no longer felt afraid of what tomorrow might bring. For the first time in years, he felt ready to face it.